pleased to welcome Ted Dintersmith. After a career as a top-performing venture capitalist, Ted has spent the last few years focused on issues related to innovation and education, and he's the producer of an award-winning movie, Most Likely to Succeed. In the fall of 2012, Ted served as part of the delegation representing the United States at the United Nations General Assembly, where he focused on global education and entrepreneurship. He's now funding and supporting a range of initiatives, mostly nonprofit in nature, which seek to improve the life and prospects of youth around the nation and the globe. Well, Ted, thanks for joining me today. I've got to tell you that your movie, Most Likely to Succeed, was a huge inspiration for me, and I really took a lot away from it. I saw it at a viewing in Newton, at the Newton High School. And not only was it provocative, I think, from the issues it raised about education, it made me think about all sorts of issues like income disparity and automation and robots and what we're entering in this 21st century. And so, congratulations on the success of that movie, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
No, I'm thrilled to be here.
And so I also I have to point out that you and I crossed paths in the business world, probably 15, 20 years ago. You were a VC in the Boston area and had involvement in one of our companies, and you've had a great track record in that world of technology and innovation.
Yeah, no, we go back a long while, and it's no coincidence really that my background in innovation, and probably you have the same route, but a background in innovation leads you to real concerns about education. And, as you said before, when we got going on this film, it was getting no visibility, the fact that automation is fundamentally changing the requirements for anybody to get ahead in society, to hold a job, to do well. And as that changes, it really shifts the demands on what kids should be getting good at in school. But schools have been very slow to make any kind of movement. And so we're largely preparing kids for, assembly line jobs that are gone instead of the jobs that they can create or invent.
Yeah, that's exactly. So I think I started my last conversation with Ray McNulty and pointed out that the word innovation is used so much now. But innovation for a school is a really challenging thing because schools, by and large, are very risk averse, and the word innovation means, I think, to take risk and to test new approaches and hope that you can innovate. And he used a phrase, I don't know if he came up with it, but I thought it was very interesting, where he says, everybody wants schools to be better, but nobody wants them to be different. And I think that's part of what you're pushing people out into that uncomfortable zone.
Yeah, I like that framing. I describe it as do things better versus do better things. And when you talk to a lot of schools about their innovation, they will talk about, memorizing electronic flashcards on an iPad, or, I'm good friends with him. He's in my film, The Khan Academy, which, largely means kids can go at their own pace, mastering low-level procedures in math they'll never use. That's doing things better. Mm-hmm. That's not doing better things. And, I'm going to defend the teachers out there because they are way more innovative than people give them credit for, but they're also far more constrained than people realize. And so, in Massachusetts, you've got the MCAS testing, you've got kids and families obsessed about SATs and ACTs, college placement, AP courses, AP exam grades, on and on and on. And so when somebody tries to go, on a different path, to have kids doing something far more engaging and meaningful, they sometimes get pushback, and the pushback can be pretty serious, with well-intentioned people thinking they're helping their kids' future, but actually hurting it.
Right. So, like I said, the movie and your blog about your travels, etc., is really brought up a lot of questions for me. I'm trying to think how to organize this conversation. But one of the things that struck me was you used a term that pent-up innovation amongst teachers, and I think that's sort of what you were just talking about. That there's a lot of creativity that sort of wants to come out, but is constricted. And I wonder if you could just maybe recall or recount some of the things or anecdotes you learned from your travel. I think you've now visited all 50 states in support of the film and this effort. maybe there's some things from that play into what you think teachers can do or might be able to do as we go forward.
Well, I had the oddest set of conversation. I think I had 1,000 meetings in a school year on that when I traveled last school year. And it's funny, everybody said, yeah, we know we need to do something really different, but the system won't let us. And there was this irony of, imagine 10 people sitting around a table in a room all saying we want to be at a different table, but the table won't let us.
Right.
As though the table's grabbing everybody and holding them. I think what happens with teachers is, as I say, a lot of times the pushback comes from parents. And parents care desperately about their kids. They want their kids to have the very best of lives. And, a teacher that, for instance, if, you went sideways to an AP curriculum and spent, 2 weeks on World War II instead of 2 days, which is, believe it or not, the amount of time allotted in the AP curriculum for the World War II, then that means you don't cover things at the very end. And that might mean a kid misses a question or two. You're putting a teacher in a really tough situation where you say, go deep on something that kids are engaged with, that they want to learn more about, encourage them to ask lots of questions, explore, come up with original perspectives. But, you might not cover some speck of content that some ridiculous committee has prescribed for the overall course that goes in one school year from 1491 to the present. Oh my gosh, what a tragedy. And so, that's kind of the life of teachers, and I think it's really tough. The thing I think, what I write about in my new book, what I think I've heard over and over again, is if you organize learning if you organize schools so the kids can't wait to get there in the morning, and they're up late at night working on things because they love it, the tests tend to take care of themselves. And the other thing I think, and you've got college-age kids as well, is that there's, I think, a disconnect between what parents think college admissions officers want and what they really want. And, not every admissions officer, but it's sort of a crapshoot. You might get a junior admissions officer who's incredibly risk-averse, but you might get a more experienced one that's looking for an interesting kid with some sign of having done things that they really cared about.
Yeah.
And I always say back to parents, would you rather micromanage your kid every step of the way and take your chances there in the admissions process, or have a kid that's really encouraged to be interesting, do interesting things, to follow what they care about, to make an impact on things? That kid might actually do better in the college admissions process, but they're certainly going to be a more healthy, more fulfilled kid, getting a better set of values that they're developing over their time in school than the kid that's told, jump through these hoops just to please some anonymous college admissions officer.
Well, for those who haven't seen the movie, the latter part is all about a group of kids at its high-tech high, I think, in San Diego, doing a project on, I think it's the rise and fall of civilizations or something very kind of amorphous. And they come up with this amazing way to express it in a project. And one group does a play, and one group does almost like a crazy wheel that turns and shows the interconnectedness of various things. And it's fascinating. And the kids work together to make that happen. But I have to say, playing the role perhaps of that nervous parent, you step back and go, well, if my kid came up with that thought or that concept, how would the people at Stanford ever know that? How do you get that nervous parent to say, okay, relax, you're part of a group, and if the project's good, it's good, but how does that exemplary kid actually jump out and gain the attention that parent probably wants him or her to get?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm one of the funders of a couple of initiatives. One is the Coalition for Access that includes, I think, all 8 Ivies, Stanford, but 130 top colleges, public and private. And it's an alternative admission path besides the Common App. And in theory, the application lets students present a digital portfolio of real things they've accomplished. Mm-hmm. And some of the colleges in the coalition are looking at digital portfolios already. That's encouraging. I sort of pound on them to have more colleges take it seriously, because it's like this really curious thing where colleges will obsess about grades and numbers that are loosely correlated to a kid's ability to do something of consequence in life, instead of looking at real examples of something they've done in life. So that I think there's some movement, slow, but at least it's in the right direction on college admissions front. I'm backing a group of schools that are banding together to do what they call it the Mastery Transcript Consortium, and they presented at the National Association of Independent Schools in Baltimore. This is now over 100 top high schools that are basically saying, here's what our transcript is going to look like going forward. And it's not, all these obsolete subjects that kids study in high school and generally never use with grades, but it's, critical skills, and it's levels of progression, and it's linking to tangible examples that show why this kid is doing, is viewed by his school as being outstanding at critical thinking. Mm-hmm. And, you've got specific examples. And so, I think as that starts to unfold, you'll start to get things that are more aligned with what a lot of more new economy employers do. I mean, like my software companies years ago, when they were recruiting younger, employees, they would look at college stuff. Now they look at GitHub, because it shows their actual coding ability.
Right.
And then they say, if the coding's great, let's have them in for an interview. My film includes Laszlo Bach, who for years ran all of people operations for Google. And he said they used to hire strictly on pedigree of, the college, grade point average, SATs. He did the numbers, and he said it was completely uncorrelated to how well they did at Google. So now a fair number of the people they hire are high school dropouts.
Wow. Yeah, and they have created things, tangible services, or as you said, GitHub code repositories, other things that you can look at and say, this is what this person's capable of, rather than an A from a specific school in a specific course.
Yeah, and those are powerful. So, but as I say, we run kids' lives entirely around a college admissions process. And, the other thing I always encourage families to look at are the mental health statistics in colleges. It's troubling.
Yeah.
The last 4 years of data, it's 83% report feeling overwhelmed, 45% report numbers of periods of time feeling hopeless. I think it's 35% report feeling times when they're depressed to the point they can't get out of bed. A third are on Adderall on a regular basis as a study drug. And you sort of look at this and say, to what end?
Right. Right.
Like when you ask parents what you want for their kid, their answer is almost always, I just want them to be happy. And then you say, so are you really, are the things you're telling them are important in high school really consistent with that?
Right.
Yeah. Really? I mean, when some of the, like I run into the most amazing things because I do all this traveling and talking and things like that. But, the parents will, BMW bribes for, perfect SATs or things like that. You just say, do you really think that's helping your kid long term? Do you really think that's a useful thing to be doing? And it ripples way back. The car drives with 8-year-olds where you're doing SAT flashcards for vocabulary words. I mean, it's just like, you look at this and you just say, if you lost your mind, right? Do you really want your kid to be happy and joyful and encouraged and sprinting on things they care about, or do you want them to look good to somebody else?
Right.
Because you never look good enough. There's always that one other person. There's always that one other classmate. We kind of get what we deserve through school when we look at kind of the impact we're having on so many kids.
Yeah. Well, that's a really sobering sort of additional point, is the happiness once you achieve this goal that we kind of all agree is important. And I do know schools like MIT and Cornell struggle with that even more than other schools. So even the highest achieving schools have a huge issue of people being happy once they're there. Wow. So let me go in a slightly different direction, and that is, you've traveled all over the place. You've seen lots of different types of schools, from big towns, wealthy towns, to rural towns. I think you said you're even like in Indian reservations and various other places. I wondered if you have a sense of, let's imagine you're in a very rural school system that doesn't have a great track record of getting kids to college. It doesn't have a super strong school system. Is there anything that you could say, let's put aside government regulations for a moment, which I know isn't realistic, but is there like a quick philosophical or change to curriculum or approach that you could say for some of those towns, and imagine the talented kids that are there kind of caught in this area wanting to blossom? What is it that could be done near term to help them do that?
Well, a lot of these kids, you know, it's so interesting. When I traveled, I went to like remote tribal villages in Alaska and Indian reservations, and you know, just a lot of kids in really unusual, difficult circumstances. And you know, you if you ask the kids what they're interested in, and then you look at what they're being told they have to study, they have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
You know, I was in Bethel, Alaska, which is this tribal hub village, and you know, the guy. I mean, I'm talking to one of the senior people at the regional high school, and he's telling me the dropout rate is 50%.
Oh God.
And I ask him why, and he has kind of struggles for answers. And then I start asking about what are the requirements to graduate. Well, it's like 2 years of German. I say, well, why German? And he says, well, that's what the foreign language teacher here teaches. And I say, well, why not their native language? Well, you know, that seems like it might be hard to do. You know, it's like, and you realize, like, you're teaching these kids things that they have no interest in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, what really surprised me is, like you know, some of these places are really desolate and remote. And I'm, like, in my own mind, probably projecting a really bad stereotype and bias, which is, I'm thinking these kids, you know, if I ask them where they'd like to live long term, they're going to tell me, I can't wait to get away from here. Mm-hmm. That's not the case. In many, many cases, these kids want to stay where they've grown up. They say, this is where my friends are. My family is here. This is where I live. This is my home. But, you know, there are no job opportunities there. So they're sort of screwed. There's no higher ed opportunities. And so you start to realize if you had, you know, like I'm asking these people, I want to just pull my hair out, but in Western Alaska, they have people come in from out of town to put up these great big enormous wind turbines. And they kind of trash the town in the process. It's all wrong.
Yeah.
And I say, what if you had your high school kids challenged to design and build working wind power and, you know, vehicles for the town? You know, invent things that are more lower footprint, more appropriate to the setting. You know, wouldn't that be interesting? Well, you know, there's no course for that. Well, of course there's no course for it. You know, like that's the deal, right? That's where the learning comes. If you say to high school kids, your challenge is to design and invent and implement and make it work, wind power for your town. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
And it's really, I think, largely a failure of imagination because, you know, they could do it, and there are people in the town that would be good advisors for the kids. And there's no shortage of kind of spare parts and junk all over some of these places. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable. I think, by and large, and this is true in those circumstances, but it's true across our country, we teach what's easy to test instead of what's important to learn. Mm-hmm. We teach what some committee in Princeton, New Jersey, or New York City, you know, Upper East Side, or who knows where, Washington, D.C., you know, a lot of these people that are by and large, and I have a PhD, so I'm dumping on myself, academic PhDs, who just live and breathe the rarefied air of the college campus. I think that's what every single kid in the country needs to learn. And, of course, every single kid should spontaneously spring into action and find it riveting. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we teach. You know, same thing with these Western, you know, remote village kids in Alaska are having to read Chaucer. And say, like, I was an English major in college. Yeah. I kind of liked Chaucer. I didn't think it was incredible, but I don't have an axe to grind with Chaucer. But why would a kid in Tuntatuliak, Alaska, give a damn about Chaucer? Right. Well, why don't they read ancient writing from their own culture and heritage?
Yeah.
You know, like why don't we start there? And you realize that, you know, like it's this general view that all kids need to be college ready, that we want every kid, you know, to like the same things that the college ready people like, that even though the best case that can be made for when this will ever be used in life is either a lie, which is it comes in handy someday, which most of this stuff doesn't, mm-hmm. or a lie, it teaches you how to think, which in most cases it's low-level memorization or mastering low-level procedures, which doesn't teach you how to think in any meaningful way. Or the third lie is, well, it's pointless, but having kids persevere on it teaches them grit. Which is like, you got to do way better than that.
Right.
I'm sorry, you've got to do way better than that, because that doesn't pass the bullshit test. I mean, like, any smart kid, when you try to pass this off, when you say, of course it's important, the cosine 2 theta is equal to 2 sine theta, cosine theta, because that will come in handy someday, or teaches you how to think, or teaches you grit. I mean, a high school kid that looks at you and says, "You're lying to me,"
right.
is a high school kid that is right. And so you start to look at this and say, we owe them more than that. We owe them something far better. And just because it's a handy question on the SAT that they've calibrated year in and year out, that's a pretty lousy reason to say we're going to have every kid spend a month learning it.
Wow, that's a great example of what could be done in rural Alaska to help kids learn better. But you're bumping heads with somebody who really is resistant to that, or just doesn't have the creative capacity to come up with that program or delegate it to the kids. And just quickly, I wondered, you touched on the idea or the prospect of online learning as something that can be made more efficient. But is there any role that you think that new technologies would play in helping to initiate that kind of change in those remote towns or in any other town? Is there some
anywhere,
kind of, Is there any development where you think technology comes in to help move things forward in a positive way on the educational front?
Yeah, I was not a MOOC fan. So when the massive online open courses came out, and we had these people, my old venture firm actually backed one of them, so I've got some inside information on that. When they came out and people swooned over, one rock star professor with 140,000 students, I actually went to the group we backed and I said, "You're wasting your time." I said, throughout time, nobody has learned from lectures.
Right.
Whether it's in person or online, you just drift off. You learn by doing, you learn by applying, you learn by actually having to teach somebody else something. You don't learn by listening to somebody talk at you and then 12 seconds later, take a multiple choice quiz question to see if you remember what you saw 3 minutes ago. I mean, it's a preposterous approach. And I think it sort of collapsed. I think at this point, most people would agree that the magic bullet of MOOCs did not materialize. And, some of the groups, to their credit, have sort of redirected and changed gear. But what else is true? What's true? And when I travel, people tell me this over and over again. They'll say, as though there's nothing profound about this, they'll say, any kid that gets interested in something can become an expert in a matter of, in a few days.
Right.
And I will say, doesn't that change what we do in school profoundly? Doesn't that tell us that what we really need to do is get kids interested in problems that are challenging and important instead of cramming stuff down their throat, again, saying, well, you may use it someday, or it teaches you how to think, or it's building grit, when actually it isn't. Think of how many, almost anybody listening to this podcast had to do chemical equation balancing sometime in high school, right? Or had to memorize cell replication, or had to factor polynomials, or had to take 2 years of a foreign language that they never spoke subsequently. Actually, when you start really drilling down on the high school curriculum, most of what kids study, they never, ever use. And so the question is, and I always say this, if I can fill up the entirety of high school life with things that are really important for kids to get good at, that will really give them a fighting chance in life, if I can fill up the entirety, wouldn't that seem to edge out all these other things that they're never going to use? That your best answer is it teaches them grit, and I think the only reason it doesn't, right, is it's not. Give you a great example, right? Here we are practicing it, public speaking. Can any adult really say, I never have to be good at talking to other people in some sort of a semi-public setting?
Right.
Not to say that every high school kid will be a great public speaker, but it certainly ranks up there with something that you could, if I had to make a case for this, why this is really important versus not, sign me up for saying public speaking is really important. It is taught nowhere in high schools. Now then you have to say, well, why is that? And then, well, maybe some get it in debate club, or some get it in, some after school activities, which often help kids learn more important things in regular school. But the reason it's not is you can't do a standardized test of public speaking.
Right.
You can assess it, you can evaluate it, you can give good feedback. A kid can do a portfolio, a college admissions officer can watch 3 talks that a kid gives to public forums and say, bingo, they're great, or they're good, or they're not that great. But it's not, there's no AP public speaking. There's no SAT public speaking test.
That's a great example. I mean, in sales and in everything. I mean, everything is
even if you're going to be one of these academic, even if you're going to be a philosophy professor in college, you should have taken public speaking in high school, which is why so many college professors read their notes, right? I mean, isn't itself, it's kind of a closed loop on this thing. But you start to look, and honestly, and this is what set me off on this, is when my kids were in middle school, I got this note about, the school's, new program to teach kids life skills. And I started making a list, and gosh, you can get a really robust list of things that anybody's going to need to be good at later in life. I'll give you another one. In this one, I've yet to get a school that said to me, yes, we do this. I asked school after school after school, do kids anywhere in their time at your school, are they given a challenge of see a math problem, look at a science experiment, read literature, anything. Give them something and say, come up with as many creative and interesting questions as you can, and we will assess you on the questions you ask, not the answers you give. Never.
No, yeah.
Never. Not one.
Yeah.
Not one time. Now, it's not even that it's a regular thing. Have you ever done this with your kids? No, but it's sure a good idea. Again, how important are asking good questions? Like nobody wants to hire somebody unless they can ask good questions, right? I mean, we all know that at a certain level. Is that progress in life comes way more from asking good questions than knowing that cosine 2 theta is equal to 2 sine theta cosine theta. Like it's clearly dramatically more important in life. But again, can you design SAT test questions around, here's a reading passage, come up with your most thought-provoking, creative questions about that reading passage. I mean, you're never going to do, you could say, which of these 4 questions is the most thought-provoking, A, B, C, or D? But but then, that doesn't make sense. They'd say, well, there's no objective criteria for thought-provoking or creative. And that's the point, right? That's the point. In the 21st century, what's valued among young adults is thought-provoking and creative, out-of-the-box thinking. And what's saddled with, what schools have to contend with is SATs that need dumbed-down, multiple choice, simple answers. And that disconnect is ruining the future of millions of kids.
Wow. So what you said earlier about some schools starting to look at portfolios and projects and the fact that, I mean, the good news here is we have technologies like podcasting and video casting and YouTube and all sorts of other things where if you do have a skill of organization and presentation, there's some hope that could come through and perhaps become part of what schools would look at in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I go back long enough that it was before online video, but I used to always ask for 3 or 4 writing samples. Show me 3 or 4 things you wrote that you feel show you at your best.
Yeah.
I don't care what the topic is, just include them. It turns out to scan a writing sample doesn't take very long.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a few minutes. Then if it looked interesting, I could pick up the phone or, do a Skype call today. But I could just say, okay, you wrote this one paper. I thought this was particularly interesting. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Well, if that paper had actually been written by their parents or by some hired tutor or something, they don't do a very good job of answering questions.
Mm-hmm.
But if they really dove in and they understood it and they can answer really interesting questions, boom, I know I've got somebody that's going to be interesting. That was a great hiring criteria. I never asked for SATs or grade point average. Not once in probably 30 years of hiring did I ever ask for those. And I think to a large extent that explained why I did so well in venture, is I didn't focus on the false positives.
Mm-hmm. Right. You have to pick the winners from among those who are just sort of blowing a lot of smoke. And that's pretty common.
Yeah, and it's actually gotten way worse, right?
Yeah.
Is that when I was growing up, school, my time in K through 12, school was probably, I don't know what, a third to half of my life, and the rest was just do whatever you want to because it was not a very competitive environment. And I can't even remember doing homework. I mean, maybe I did some, but I think I went all the way K through 12 and probably did very little homework. That's not the case anymore.
No, not at all.
It's gone from 50% of a kid's life to 125% of their life. And so, when you start to say to a kid over and over and over again, you're going to be valued, which is what schools say to kids. They say you will be valued on how ruthlessly time efficient you can be at mastering tidbits of content, taking tests that require you to provide the right answers, and getting on to the next assignment. That's what kids are conditioned to get good at. Those are our stellar students. And then what I find, and this is what employers tell me all the time, is you hire these kids with great academic backgrounds, and you give them an ambiguous problem. You say, we've got an issue with returns. Can you figure it out? They say, sure, yeah. I'm there for that. What do I need to do? And you say,
Yes.
I just told you. We're having too many customer returns, and we need to fix that problem. So we need you to solve it. And it's like, yeah, fine, but what do I need to do? Give me my assignment. Break it up into micro tasks that I can parse, because that's what I'm good at. And, there's this quote, I repeat it, but it was a senior person at Apple Computer who said, we've decided that any employee who needs a boss is no longer employable.
Wow.
And, which is very powerful, but also very true, right? I mean,
Right.
You don't want people that you have to micromanage. I mean, Siri, you're okay micromanaging because Siri is free. But you don't want an expensive employee that you've got to kind of parse out the instructions on an hourly basis. And, but that's what schools condition kids to do. And it's so interesting, right, that it actually is the inverse of what you would expect. When kids are in the early grades, they have a lot of unstructured time to explore. As they get into high school and then college, they have essentially no unstructured time to explore.
Yeah.
And yet that's the very thing you want in an employee. It's somebody that can go find problems and invent solutions on their own without needing constant reinforcement. And so in a world that sort of says we should be having kids as they get higher in school become less and less dependent on formal instruction, we actually do the opposite.
Wow.
We actually say every kid in high school has to go to college. Every four-year college graduate really should go to graduate school. You really should do at least, 18 years of school, maybe 20. And then you say, well, why? Wait, if you can learn anything you want online and become an expert quickly, why isn't that the skill we reinforce? Why isn't that the skill we want kids to develop? Because and I think the answer is it doesn't serve the long-term interests of school.
Mm-hmm.
If you make kids less dependent on formal instruction, guess what happens? They stop paying college tuition.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I just quickly on that point, I was at a meeting, an architectural meeting, and they were showing off this new facility they built at a leading university, and it had these huge lecture halls in it. And I asked, well, that's odd that you guys did that. And he said that was a subject of great debate, but in the end, they couldn't let go of the fact that the economics of having that kind of facility were very attractive to the university. And all of us in the room kind of hung our heads and said that may be real, but that's not going to last too long.
That speaks volumes. And you start to look at that, and you say, look at the cost. I mean, tuition levels have gone up 8% a year for 30 years. It puts healthcare costs to shame in terms of increases.
Right.
And then you start to say, well, my gosh, why? And then you look at those college budgets, right? And it goes tons of money into student activity center and sports teams and arenas and mailing brochures to get more and more people to apply, and dorm rooms that make the Four Seasons look like a Motel 6.
Yeah, right.
And yet on the instruction, and anybody who doubts what I'm about to say needs to read Academically Adrift. The instruction is still in the dark ages, and the myth that kids are learning an enormous amount in college is exactly that. It's a myth. And when the researchers took this on for Academically Adrift, they found almost no increase in students' ability to do things like critical thinking as the years go by in a college environment. And those lecture halls tell you, right, is that's the cost-effective way. Colleges, by and large, have courses taught by faculty that are neither good at teaching nor care about it. And kids go in, take notes. A friend of mine who's the chair of the Applied Physics Department at Harvard, Eric Mazur, who is a college faculty member but is great on education, But he has this phrase I love, which is, a lecture is one of those few times in life where the words go from the mouth of the professor to the notebook of the student without passing through the brains of either. And you realize that's the deal, right?
Wow.
That's the deal.
Yeah.
And but you want that batch processing. And so much of it is designed to weed kids out of professions instead of help them learn and make progress in a profession. And so you have these great big, ask the next 20 doctors you meet, how many of them use organic chemistry on any kind of regular basis? None.
Not many, yeah.
And, but how many potentially great, thoughtful, good question asking, empathetic people can't be doctors because they couldn't pass organic chemistry? A fair number, right? And I run into places in most ludicrous of ways where a prerequisite for a business major is calculus.
Yeah.
You just have to say, if in 30 years of math-intensive chip companies and backing algorithm companies, and I'm at the forefront of math-intensive business activities and initiatives and startups, nobody uses calculus.
Mm-hmm.
It's like really, don't you ever go out and ask people if they ever use this? You could poll, if you could flash poll 100 million business people in America today and say, when's the last time you did an integral or derivative by hand? It'd be high school.
Yeah, and there's no reason to do that because it can be done for you on a spreadsheet or a computer in no time at all.
There's a smartphone app, PhotoMath. You just hold your camera over the integral or derivative and it gives you the answer.
What? Really?
And so then you say, well, what exactly is the point of requiring calculus as a prerequisite for a business career? What's the point actually for requiring calculus for engineering, right? I would say, hey, orient somebody, give them 10 minutes on Wolfram Alpha, all their calculus problems are behind them. It's like right there.
Yeah, though I do have a temptation to say that some of those learning to think and the rudiments of math are useful to where I have a hard time saying, dispense of that entirely or agreeing that might be the right approach. And I'm sure that's what you hear from lots of people, that it helps you think.
I totally hear that. And then I go into AP calculus courses and I ask kids, could you just in words tell me what an integral is?
Mm-hmm.
Blank stares. Can you just tell me, I'm just curious, when would you ever use this? No idea.
Yeah.
Trust me, I've got published papers from back in the day, when I was an undergraduate, which goes back so far that there were not, you didn't have computational resources. I had to do hairy closed form integrals by hand using lookup tables and everything else. I understand how it got into the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
I understand what its role is. I've got 2 JFIS review published articles that say I actually know a little bit about this. But that's just it. That was back in an era when you couldn't do them computationally.
Right.
Today you can't. And so when somebody tells me that a hyperbolic cosine transformation gives you any real insight into how you use calculus, I say, well, then why isn't anybody using it? Like all these people have to study in high school. Why is it that in 2 years of asking audiences, is anybody using calculus in their daily professional life? Even when I go to 3D modeling software companies or Boeing aircraft, when I say, anybody here using calculus on a regular basis, a thin number use the principles, but they all those operations are done computationally.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's doing closed form integral by hand. And so does it teach you to think in the same way that Sudoku does? I suppose, but should it block people from a career path? Should somebody who's really good at taking apart a car engine and putting it back together not be able to be an engineer because a kid that's good at calculus takes that spot?
Yeah.
Who can't even tell you how a car engine operates? Think about that. Think about mechanical engineering, where a kid that's proficient at hacking and taking apart engines can design and make things work in the real world will get turned down for the engineering path. And the kid that's really fast at doing the closed form integral will be accepted because somehow that's a better form of learning. And I say, like, why? Where did we ever get that idea?
Yeah.
When did mechanical engineering stop being about mechanics and start being about low-level math that any smartphone does better?
Wow.
But that's the world we live with.
Yeah. So I was thinking as you were talking about the assignment to help inventory and how the kids say, okay, well, what do I do next? What do I do next? That in a way that is a really close analogy to what a computer can do. That a computer will take these batch things and give you answers for each one of them. And so the teaching approach that we have now teaches kids to do things that are most susceptible to being replaced by automation. And it's not just on the manual side. And we used to talk about the knowledge economy and knowledge workers. That now even people with knowledge, like the computations that you're talking about, that can be put through a computer very quickly and answered, as you illustrated in the movie where IBM's Watson won the Jeopardy game, and I think that kind of was the big wake-up call that you illustrated in the movie, and how that really changes everything.
Yeah, it's so funny about that scene in the movie, because at the time we filmed the movie, that was the high watermark, and since then, in the last 2 years, Watson has beat the world's best Go player, and Watson now has beaten the world's best poker player.
Oh,
and it wasn't that long ago when people said those were things that computers could never do better than people.
Right.
And, I had a personal friend who, dealing with a particularly difficult, hard to diagnose form of cancer, and, his daughter had started to run a biotech company that went public, so, access to the world's best medical resources, went to all these leading cancer, sites in the country. And they finally said, this case is so hard, what we're going to do is send all your test results to Watson. And because that is better able to diagnose your cancer than any of us, world's leading oncologists said Watson is better for this particularly difficult form of cancer. So then you have to say, well, if Watson's better than the best oncologists in the world in the most difficult forms of cancer, isn't Watson better at more straightforward forms of cancer? Well, yes. And isn't Watson dramatically better than an average oncologist? Well, absolutely. And so you start to think, the jobs that are going away aren't moving boxes around on a factory floor. Mm-hmm. They're not putting widgets in a hosing to make some widget work. It's at that level. If that's what's going on, even if we did an amazing job in schools, I still think we have really deep societal issues to contend with, because it's just the bar for being able to plug in and make a contribution to an organization or to your community, just is getting higher and higher. And I actually, what gives me optimism is, and I always say this to audiences, because I do start my talks off with I say, this is the castor oil. I have to tell you this. I don't want to tell you
you
this.
got to choke on it.
But I have to tell you this because you need to know, and you need to know how serious it is. But I say, if you want to be optimistic, just go hang around with some 4-year-olds. They ask a million questions. They're curious beyond belief. They learn at warp speed. They fear failure. They have no fear of failure. They think outside the box. They, just like all the things that would be perfect for a world of innovation are already there in our kids when they're young.
Yeah.
Our challenge is not putting something in them they don't have. Our challenge is to stop crushing out of them what they are born with.
Right.
And, but we do, and we do it on purpose, because that was a model that goes back to, the time of, the assembly line, Henry Ford.
Yeah. Well, I'll take as optimism and optimistic the answer you gave about the Indian reservation, or the Alaska town, where going out and solving wind power as a project would give you the ability to, I think, transition and transform on an ongoing basis, which I think is what we're both saying, that ability to say, well, what needs to be fixed now, what needs to be done now, is almost what's demanded, versus I need to have a skill that's set in stone that I can stand on from here forward. So
you just think, those kids would be all over inventing and creating different solutions, trying things, deciding which ones have promise and which ones don't, and they can do it. that's one of the things that was the most stunning takeaway for me in the trip is, we spend forever in our country trying to close the achievement gap. That the poor kids, the kids with broken homes, the kids, in the tough neighborhoods are enormously behind the rich kids on the achievement gap. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever steps back and says, what gap? Like, how are we measuring the gap? Mm-hmm. And it turns out we're measuring it by, do they know vocabulary words that almost no adult ever uses? And are they really fast and accurate on low-level math procedures? That's the achievement gap, which the rich families are on with their kids almost from birth.
Right.
And the poor families aren't. And yet when you start to give kids authentic, messy, real-world problems, the rich kids that have been micromanaged every step of the way often fall apart. And the kids that's had to just scrape by, have to been resourceful beyond belief just to keep their head above water. Once it's something that, that reflects a problem they think is important, they blow you away. Yeah. And so my point is that today we measure academic performance in a way that reflects the motivation and energy and commitment of the parent, not of the student.
Right.
And we do it in a way that has no alignment with what's going to be required later in life. And so you look at this and say, that's profoundly wrong. Mm-hmm. And honestly, we can't keep doing things that make David Coleman, the president of the College Board's life, more convenient. David just got to have to understand that the world does not revolve around what makes life easy for the people designing the SAT.
Yeah. Well, I as I said, just seeing the movie and reading some of your accounts bring up all sorts of issues. We could go, I could talk for a long time about it. I do appreciate you making time to have this conversation. It would be, I think it'll be interesting to follow your follow-on project. I did read a little bit about, was it Team 19 or something? There's some things coming up that will build on this.
We've got a short video on that. I backed a couple of young women filmmakers that have a film called She Started It, about high school and college women starting their own companies. I do want to add one last observation, which is the film is about this school in San Diego, and the physical space is just stunning, but it really is a space without any walls. Mm-hmm. And to a very large extent, I mean, our film team loved it because it was an easy place to film, but people will look at it and say, well, we could never afford a building like that. Well, it turns out that buildings with lots of walls are actually pretty expensive relative to buildings that have no walls. And, there are a lot of opportunities because the space does drive the way people think about interacting and engaging with each other. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really, we tend to think of how you configure the physical aspects of the school as an afterthought. It's not. I think that the more that we can break down boundaries between disciplines, boundaries between groups of kids, boundaries between the school and the outside community, that schools without boundaries are way better than schools that are siloed off.
Wow, that's well said. I have been in touch with the folks here in Somerville. They're one of the schools that got funding, and they're building this this program called Powderhouse Studios, and they got an old school building, and their renovation to that building is to literally just knock down all the walls so it's open, and it basically is exactly what you're talking about. How to build an environment where there's open collaboration, a spirit of interdisciplinary interaction, and I think you're right on with that. We're not creating. Somebody else at a conference called them cells and bells, where they, you go into your little room and you wait for the bell to move in the next pod. That you have a much more fluid flowing educational environment, and that I think is right on.
Yeah, I love that, cells and bells.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that before. It might be common in the architectural world, but it certainly was. I think defines the educational experience that I had was from one four-wall environment to the next. Well, Ted, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk. It's fascinating, and I will be following your work very closely as you go forward. It's great stuff.
Excellent. Good. We'll get together in person in Boston next time I'm there.
Sounds good. I appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.